Hello everyone, have you ever stood in front of the two people who raised you, gathered all your courage and asked for help, only to hear a single sentence that changed your life forever? I did. At 18, with acceptance papers in my trembling hands, I asked my parents for help with tuition. They looked at me and said, "Be independent." I walked out that day feeling small, never imagining what would happen 9 years later. I used to believe family would always be my safety net, until the day I realized I was standing on a tightrope alone. Before we continue, please take a second to support this video by liking and subscribing. Truly helps more than you know. And I'd love to connect with you. Drop your hometown in the comments so I can see how far this story travels across the world. I still remember the weight of that envelope in my hands. It was thick, official, and life-changing. My acceptance letter to one of the top universities in the country. I had worked for it. Late nights studying while my friends were out. Weekends sacrificed for entrance exams. Endless cups of instant coffee that kept me awake past midnight. I wasn't the smartest in my class, but I was determined, and I thought my parents would be proud. When I stepped into the living room that evening, my father was reading the newspaper, and my mother was watching television. The house smelled like fried shallots and jasmine tea, comforting, familiar. For a brief second, I allowed myself to imagine their smiles. "I got in," I said, my voice trembling slightly. My mother turned first. "Got in where?" I handed them the letter. There was silence as my father adjusted his glasses and read. My heart pounded so loudly I thought they could hear it. I was already imagining the celebration. Maybe a small dinner, maybe a hug. Instead, my father folded the letter neatly and placed it on the table. "That's good," he said calmly. "Good. Not amazing. Not incredible. Just good. And I need help with the tuition," I added carefully. "The deadline is next month." My mother looked at my father. My father looked at me. And then came the sentence that echoed in my head for years. "You're an adult now," he said. "Be independent." First I thought he was joking. I even let out a small laugh. But no one else did. "I can work part-time," I said quickly. "But the first payment is too big. I just need help to start." My mother shook her head gently. "We paid for your school all these years. University is your responsibility." It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I wasn't asking for luxury. I wasn't asking for a car or an apartment. I was asking for a chance. "I'm your son," I said softly. "And that's why we're teaching you to stand on your own," my father replied. There was no anger in his voice. No shouting. Just firmness. Finality. That hurt more. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I replayed every word. Be independent. The phrase wrapped around me like a cold wind. Was I wrong to ask? Maybe they were right. Maybe this was what adulthood meant. Maybe I was supposed to struggle. The next morning, I started applying for jobs. I worked at a small cafe near campus before classes even began. I carried trays, wiped tables, memorized orders. My hands smelled like coffee grounds and detergent. I smiled at customers even when my feet ached. During the day, I attended orientation sessions. At night I studied. There were moments I felt proud. I was doing it, on my own. But there were also moments, quiet, heavy moments, when I watched other students hug their parents after being dropped off. I saw fathers carrying suitcases, mothers adjusting their children's collars. I arrived alone. I told myself it didn't matter. Yet every time I checked my bank account and saw how close I was to missing a payment, I felt a tight knot in my chest. Independence wasn't glamorous. It was exhausting. Still, I refused to quit. Because deep down, something had shifted in me that day in the living room. If they wanted me to be independent, then I would be. I would build something so solid that no one could ever question my strength again. I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But I made a silent promise to myself as I walked home from my shift one night, the city lights flickering above me. One day I would remember this feeling. And 9 years later they would too. And 9 years later they would too. But back then, I had no idea how brutal the journey between that promise and its fulfillment would be. The first semester hit me like a storm I wasn't prepared for. Tuition was only the beginning. There were books, lab fees, transportation, group projects that required shared contributions that always seemed to fall heavier on me. My cafe salary barely covered the basics. I learned how to survive on instant noodles and discounted bread that expired the next day. Every rupiah mattered. I stopped hanging out with friends after class because even a simple coffee felt like a luxury. When they talked about weekend trips or new gadgets, I smiled and nodded, pretending I had other plans. The truth? My plan was survival. One night, after closing the cafe, my manager called me into his office. "You're a hard worker," he said, "but we need someone full-time during the holidays. If you want more hours, your grades can't suffer. Customers complain if you look tired." I almost laughed. Look tired? I was tired. Permanently. "I can handle it," I said. And I did. For 3 months straight, I worked double shifts during the break. While other students posted beach photos and family gatherings, I wiped tables and refilled sugar jars. I memorized regular customers' orders. I learned how to upsell pastries. I studied accounting terms during my 10-minute breaks. But the real breaking point came during my second year. The cafe reduced staff unexpectedly. Sales were down. My hours were cut in half. I remember staring at my new schedule like it was a death sentence. Half the income. Full tuition. I called my mother that evening. I didn't plan to. My fingers just moved. "Hello," she answered. I swallowed my pride. "Mom, things are tight. My work hours were reduced. I just need a small loan. I'll pay it back." Silence. Then gently but firmly, "You chose this path. We believe you can handle it." Believe. I didn't need belief. I needed help. "I'm trying," I said, my voice cracking before I could stop it. "That's good," she replied. Struggle builds character. When the call ended, I sat on the edge of my narrow dorm bed. Phone still in my hand. The room felt smaller than ever. The walls felt closer. For the first time, resentment crept in. Was independence supposed to feel like abandonment? I didn't drop out. I couldn't. If I quit, their words would be right. I would have proven that I needed saving. Instead, I did something reckless. I started a small online business. First, it was simple. I noticed my classmates struggling to find affordable printed notes and summarized materials. So I created digital study guides, clear, concise, color-coded. I sold them for a small price. The first week, 2 buyers. The second week, 7. By midterms, dozens. I stayed up until 3 a.m. designing layouts, editing content, responding to messages. My eyes burned. My back ached. But for the first time, I felt something different. Control. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. One afternoon, a senior from another faculty approached me. "Are you the one selling those summaries online?" he asked. I braced myself for criticism. "Yes. They're good," he said. "You should expand. Maybe create a platform." A platform. The word echoed in my mind long after he left. That night, instead of studying, I researched websites hosting coding tutorials. I knew nothing about tech, but I knew what it felt like to need something affordable and accessible. And I wasn't the only one. Within a year, my small study guide hustle turned into a growing academic resource website. Students from other universities began downloading materials. Some volunteered to contribute. Money started flowing in, not massive amounts but enough to breathe. For the first time since that living room conversation, I paid my tuition early. Early. I stared at the receipt on my phone, heart pounding. I had done it without begging, without borrowing. But something inside me had changed. When my parents called to ask how school was going, I kept my answers short. "Fine. Busy. Everything's under control." They didn't ask about finances anymore. I didn't tell them about the business. Part of me wanted them to see me struggle, to imagine me barely hanging on. Was that petty? Maybe. But pride is a powerful fuel. By my final year, my platform had thousands of users. Advertisers began reaching out. I registered it officially as a company. I was still exhausted, still juggling exams and customer support emails at midnight. But I was no longer the scared 18-year-old holding an envelope in the living room. I was someone else now. Someone sharper, stronger, and perhaps colder. At graduation, as I stood in line wearing my gown, I scanned the crowd. Families filled the seats. Flowers, cameras, cheers. And then I saw them. My parents. They had come. My mother waved. My father gave a small nod. I smiled back. But deep inside, I couldn't ignore the thought that rose quietly, steadily, like a tide coming in. They were about to meet the independent person they had demanded, and I wasn't sure they were ready for who I had become. Because the person standing under that graduation cap was no longer the hopeful teenager who once waited for approval in the living room. When my name was called, I walked across the stage with steady steps. Applause filled the hall. My hands didn't tremble this time. My smile wasn't searching for validation. It was controlled, measured, independent. After the ceremony, my mother hugged me tightly. "We're so proud of you," she said, her voice emotional. Proud. That word felt heavier now than it did 9 years ago. "Congratulations," my father added. "You proved us right." Proved them right. I forced a smile. Right about what? That you could stand on your own. There it was again. As if my struggle had been a planned lesson. As if the sleepless nights, the panic over tuition deadlines, the quiet tears in a cramped dorm room were part of some master strategy. I nodded politely. Inside something burned. They didn't know how close I had come to giving up. They didn't know about the nights I skipped meals so I could pay hosting fees for my website. They didn't know about the anxiety attacks before big payments were due. And they definitely didn't know that the small online project they had never asked about was now generating more income than my father's annual salary. I hadn't told them. Not because I couldn't, but because I wouldn't. After graduation, while my classmates rushed to apply for corporate jobs, I made a different choice. I went all in on my platform. People said I was reckless. "You have a degree from a top university," one friend told me. "Why risk it on a website?" Because that website was more than a business. It was proof. Within a year, we expanded into video courses, then scholarship databases, then partnerships with institutions. I hired my first employee, then 5, then 20. I moved out of my tiny rented room into a modest apartment downtown. The first night there, I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the city lights through wide glass windows. I remembered the tight dorm walls, the instant noodles, the phone call where my mother said struggle builds character. I whispered to myself, "You built this. Not them. Me." But success has a strange way of changing relationships. The first time my parents visited my new apartment, my mother looked around in awe. "You live here?" she asked. "Yes." "With your salary?" "My business," I corrected gently. My father's eyes narrowed slightly. "Business." I explained everything carefully, briefly. The growth, the users, the revenue streams, the team. Silence filled the room. Finally, he said, "So you're doing well." It wasn't a question. "Yes." Another pause. Then something unexpected happened. My father cleared his throat. "You know, we always knew you had potential. That's why we pushed you." Pushed me. That word landed differently. I wanted to ask, was it pushing? Or was it letting me fall and hoping I'd learn how to fly? But I stayed quiet. Over the next few months, their tone changed. Subtly at first. My mother began calling more often. "Don't work too hard," she'd say. My father asked detailed questions about expansion plans. Then one evening, during dinner at their house, my father leaned back in his chair and said something that made time freeze. "You know, your cousin is struggling with university fees. Maybe you can guide him." Guide. Not help. Guide. But we both knew what he meant. I looked at my cousin across the table. He avoided my gaze, embarrassed. In that moment, I saw myself at 18, hopeful, nervous, asking for help. My chest tightened. Would I do what they did? Would I say, "Be independent"? The room felt heavy. "I'll think about it," I replied calmly. On the drive home, my mind raced. 9 years ago, I asked for a bridge. They gave me a lecture. Now the roles were shifting. The independent son had become the successful one. And suddenly, I realized something unsettling. Power changes everything. The next week, my father called. "We're considering renovating the house," he said casually. "It's getting old." I listened carefully. "And we thought maybe you could invest. It's for the family after all." There it was. Not a demand. Not a request. An expectation. Family. The same word that once felt like a safety net. Now it felt like a test. I stared at the skyline from my office window that night, memories colliding with the present. Be independent. The sentence that shaped me. The sentence that hardened me. The sentence that built this empire. And now 9 years later, they were about to learn what independence really meant. And now 9 years later, they were about to learn what independence really meant. Because independence isn't just about surviving alone. It's about deciding who gets access to the life you built. When my father asked me to invest in renovating the house, I didn't answer immediately. I told him I needed time to review my finances. That part was true. But what I was really reviewing was my heart. For days I couldn't focus. In meetings, while my team discussed expansion strategies and new partnerships, my mind drifted back to that living room 9 years ago. The folded acceptance letter. The calm, firm voice. You're an adult now. Be independent. Was this my moment to mirror those words back at them? Technically, I could afford the renovation without blinking. The numbers in my account were no longer fragile. My company had just secured a major partnership with the National Education Network. Investors were circling. Articles were being written about the young founder who disrupted academic access. Everyone saw the success. No one saw the scars. That weekend, I drove back to my parents' house alone. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The paint was fading. The gate squeaked when I pushed it open. For a second, guilt crept in. My mother welcomed me warmly. My father tried to act casual, but I could see the anticipation in his eyes. After dinner, we sat in the living room. The same sofa, the same wooden table where my acceptance letter once lay like a fragile dream. My father cleared his throat. So, have you thought about it? I nodded slowly. I have. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. 9 years ago, I asked for help with tuition. The room fell silent instantly. My mother looked down. My father didn't interrupt. I wasn't asking for comfort. I was asking for support to start. You told me to be independent. My voice wasn't angry. It was controlled. That made it heavier. And I did. I worked. I struggled. I built everything from scratch. My father's jaw tightened slightly. And we're proud of that. I know, I replied. But you have to understand something. Independence changes a person. My mother's eyes shimmered. Are you saying you won't help us? That question hit deeper than I expected. I stood up and walked slowly around the room, absorbing the familiar scent of old wood and cooking spices. I'm saying, I continued carefully, that when I needed a bridge, I was told to swim. I turned to face them, and I learned how to swim very well. Silence pressed against the walls. My father leaned forward. Are you punishing us? Punishing? Was that what this was? I took a deep breath. No. I'm setting boundaries. The word sounded foreign in this house. I will help renovate this house, I said finally. But not because it's expected. Not because I owe you. I'll do it because I choose to. My mother exhaled softly, almost like she had been holding her breath for minutes. But there's something else, I added. They looked at me. I'm also creating a scholarship fund. My father blinked. For who? For students who can't afford tuition. Students who ask for help and actually receive it. The air shifted. This wasn't revenge. This was redirection. I continued. If I ever have children one day, I don't want them to associate strength with loneliness. My mother wiped a tear from her cheek. My father stayed quiet for a long moment before speaking. We thought we were teaching you resilience, he said quietly. We didn't realize how alone you felt. That sentence cracked something inside me. For 9 years, I had carried the narrative that they simply didn't care, that they chose principle over me. But now, looking at them older, softer, I saw something else. Fear. Maybe they had been afraid of raising someone dependent. Maybe they believed struggle was the only teacher worth trusting. We were wrong about one thing, my father continued. We should have listened more. The living room felt different now. Lighter. Not because the past disappeared, but because it was finally acknowledged. That night, I transferred the first payment for the house renovation. Not as a son seeking approval, not as a child proving something, but as a man choosing generosity. On my drive back to the city, I expected to feel victorious. Instead, I felt calm, because independence wasn't about withholding help. It was about having the power to give it without losing yourself. Still, I couldn't shake one lingering thought. If they had said yes 9 years ago, would I still have become this person? Or did their refusal unknowingly create something far bigger than any of us imagined? That question haunted me for weeks. Because the truth was uncomfortable. Their no had ignited a fire in me that comfort never could. After agreeing to renovate the house and launching the scholarship fund, something unexpected happened. The story spread. First, it was small. A local journalist wrote an article about our platform's growth. In the interview, I briefly mentioned why I created the scholarship program. I know what it feels like to almost lose your education because of money, I said. I didn't mention my parents. I didn't need to. The article went viral. Emails started pouring in. Students from different cities shared their struggles, working double shifts, hiding financial stress from friends, feeling ashamed to ask for help. Reading their messages felt like reading my own diary from 9 years ago. One email stopped me cold. I asked my parents for help, the student wrote. They told me to be independent. I'm trying, but I'm tired. My chest tightened. The exact words. Be independent. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying personally. You're not weak for asking, I wrote back. And you're not alone. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. We expanded the scholarship fund beyond what I originally planned. Not just tuition assistance, but mentorship, financial literacy workshops, mental health support. I didn't want students to just survive. I wanted them to feel supported. The numbers grew faster than I expected. Donations from private partners came in. Corporations reached out. Influencers shared the story. Within a year, our foundation helped over 1,000 students. 1,000. The boy who once counted coins to afford instant noodles was now signing approval forms that covered entire semesters for others. Success felt different now. Less sharp. Less fueled by proving something. More purposeful. But just as everything seemed aligned, life threw another twist. One evening my mother called. Her voice wasn't calm like usual. Your father collapsed at work, she said. The world slowed. Is he okay? He's stable. The doctor says it's stress-related. Stress. I was on the next flight home. When I entered the hospital room, I saw my father lying there, smaller than I remembered. The strong, firm man who once folded my acceptance letter now looked fragile. He opened his eyes when he heard me. You didn't have to come, he murmured. I almost laughed. 9 years ago, I needed them and they stayed firm. Now they needed me, and I didn't hesitate. I wanted to, I replied. There was no pride in that moment. No power struggle. Just family. Over the next few days, I handled the hospital bills quietly. I arranged for better insurance coverage. I spoke to doctors. I updated relatives. Not because I owed them, but because I could. One night, while my father was resting, my mother and I sat in the hospital corridor. She looked at me carefully. You've changed, she said. I had to. She nodded slowly. We didn't know how much pressure you were carrying. I didn't respond immediately. Maybe, she continued, we confused independence with distance. That sentence lingered in the air. Independence with distance. Had I done the same? In building my empire, improving my strength, had I quietly distanced myself too? When my father was discharged, I stayed home for a week. For the first time in years, I wasn't running meetings or reviewing contracts. I ate dinner at the old wooden table again. I listened to stories I had once ignored. The house renovation was almost complete. Fresh paint, stronger roof, brighter lights. It looked renewed, and somehow so did we. Before I returned to the city, my father called me into the living room. I owe you something, he said. I raised an eyebrow. You don't owe me. Yes, I do. He looked at the table, the same one that had witnessed everything. When you asked for help 9 years ago, I thought saying no would make you stronger. I didn't realize strength can grow without cutting someone off. My throat tightened. I'm proud of your success, he continued. But I'm even more proud that you didn't let bitterness define you. Bitterness. I had come dangerously close. As I drove back to the airport, I realized something powerful. Their refusal built my resilience. But my forgiveness built my peace. Still deep inside, one final truth was forming. Success is loud, but healing is louder. Success is loud, but healing is louder. And just when I thought the loudest chapter of my life was behind me, the universe decided to test whether I truly believed that. A few months after my father recovered, my company reached a milestone I once thought was impossible. We signed a national contract with the Ministry of Education to digitize academic support for public universities. Overnight, our user base tripled. News outlets called me the symbol of self-made independence. Self-made. That phrase followed me everywhere. On billboards, on podcasts, on conference stages where I stood under blinding lights, telling my story to thousands. They applauded when I said I worked double shifts. They gasped when I mentioned almost losing my tuition spot. They cheered when I said, "No one is coming to save you, so build your own ladder." But every time I said those words, something inside me hesitated, because it wasn't entirely true anymore. Yes, no one saved me back then. But along the way, mentors appeared. Friends promoted my platform for free. Strangers donated to the scholarship fund. My team worked nights to fix system crashes. Independence started my journey. Community sustained it. One evening after a major award ceremony, I returned to my penthouse apartment overlooking the city. The skyline glittered beneath me like a field of stars. I should have felt invincible. Instead, I felt empty. I poured myself a glass of water and stared at my reflection in the dark window. The suit, the watch, the calm, confident posture. Was this the boy who once counted coins on his dorm desk? Or had I become someone shaped entirely by proving a point? My phone buzzed. It was a message from one of our scholarship recipients. A young woman from a small town. "Sir," she wrote, "today I paid my tuition without fear for the first time. My parents cried. Thank you for making my independence less lonely." Less lonely. The words hit me harder than any award. Independence wasn't meant to isolate. It was meant to empower. The next day, I made a decision that shocked my executive team. "I'm stepping down as CEO," I announced during our board meeting. Silence fell over the room. "You can't be serious," my co-founder said. "We're at our peak." "I know," I replied calmly. "That's exactly why." I explained that I wanted to focus fully on the foundation, on policy reform, on building systems that ensured students never had to choose between pride and education. Money was no longer the goal. Impact was. Some investors were skeptical. Headlines speculated wildly. Was I burned out? Was there internal conflict? The truth was simpler. For 9 years, I built success to answer a sentence. Be independent. Now I wanted to redefine it. A week later, I held a national press conference, not to announce revenue numbers, but to announce a bold initiative, a nationwide emergency tuition safety net. No student would lose their seat because of a temporary financial gap. As I stood behind the podium, cameras flashing, I caught a glimpse of my parents sitting in the front row. My mother smiled through tears. My father sat straighter than I had ever seen him. When it was time for questions, a journalist asked, "What drives you to invest so much into this cause?" I paused. The room was silent. 9 years ago, I began slowly. I asked for help and was told to be independent. That moment changed me. It forced me to grow. I glanced at my parents. But growth doesn't mean shutting doors behind you. It means building wider ones for others. The applause that followed felt different from all the others. It wasn't admiration. It was resonance. That night, after the event, my father approached me quietly. "You've taken our lesson further than we ever imagined," he said. I smiled softly. I rewrote it. For the first time, independence didn't feel like a shield. It felt like a bridge. And yet, there was still one final chapter waiting to unfold. Because the real test of independence isn't how high you rise. It's what you do when someone you love stands where you once stood, asking for help. Because the real test of independence isn't how high you rise. It's what you do when someone you love stands where you once stood, asking for help. And that moment came sooner than I expected. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. I was back at my parents' house, sitting at the renovated wooden table that had witnessed every version of me. Hopeful, broken, determined, successful. My cousin Arga walked in holding an envelope. My chest tightened instantly. It was almost poetic. He sat across from me, hands slightly trembling. I got accepted, he said, barely able to hide his excitement. I smiled. That's incredible. He swallowed. But the tuition deadline is next month. The room went silent. I could feel my parents watching us, not interfering this time, just observing. 9 years collapsed into a single heartbeat. I saw myself in him, the nervous smile, the fear of rejection, the fragile hope. I've applied for part-time jobs, Arga rushed to explain. I'm not asking for everything. I just need help to start. Help to start. The exact words I once used. My mind replayed my father's voice from the past. You're an adult now. Be independent. For a split second, ego whispered, say it. Make him stronger. Let him struggle. But another voice, quieter, wiser, rose within me. Struggle builds resilience. Support builds confidence. I leaned forward. How much do you need? I asked calmly. Arga blinked, shocked. You're willing to help? I'm willing to invest, I corrected gently. In me? He asked. In your beginning. Tears filled his eyes before he could hide them. Behind him, I saw my mother press her hand to her mouth. My father looked down at the table, his expression unreadable. But this wasn't just about money. There's one condition, I added. Arga nodded quickly. Anything. You'll work part-time. You'll manage your own budget. You'll send me a progress update every semester. Not because I doubt you, but because I want you to learn accountability. He nodded again. I will. And one day, I continued, my voice steady, when someone else stands where you are now, you won't close the door. He understood. This wasn't charity. It was continuity. That night, after Arga left, my father approached me quietly. You did what we couldn't, he said. I shook my head. You gave me the foundation. I just added compassion. He sat down across from me. You know, he began slowly, when you asked for help back then, I was afraid. Afraid that if I helped too much, you'd never learn to stand alone. I listened carefully, but I didn't realize that standing alone and standing supported aren't opposites. The weight of 9 years lifted in that moment. I needed both, I admitted. Pressure and reassurance. I only got one. My father nodded, eyes glistening slightly. I see that now. For the first time, there was no tension in the room. No unspoken pride. No silent scoreboard of who was right. Just understanding. Weeks later, Arga started university. I attended his orientation with him, not to carry his bags, but to show him he wasn't alone. As we walked through the campus gates, he looked at me. Did you walk in alone your first day? He asked. Yes, I replied honestly. He was quiet for a moment. I'm glad I don't have to. So was I. That night, I returned to my apartment and stood by the window, looking at the city lights that once felt like distant dreams. 9 years ago, I walked out of a living room feeling small. Today, I walk into rooms knowing my worth isn't tied to anyone's approval. Independence didn't mean rejecting help. It meant having the strength to ask for it, and the wisdom to give it. Conclusion. The real meaning of be independent. When my parents told me to be independent, I thought it meant I was alone. I thought it meant I had to prove myself without support. But 9 years later, I learned something bigger. Independence is not about refusing help. It's not about pride. It's not about surviving in silence. True independence is about responsibility. Over your growth, your choices, and your response to pain. You can turn rejection into resentment, or you can turn it into purpose. My parents' refusal didn't destroy me. It shaped me. But forgiveness transformed me. So if you're watching this and you've been told to be independent, remember this. Build your strength. Chase your dreams. Stand on your own feet. But when you're strong enough, be the support you once needed. Because success proves a point. Compassion changes a legacy. Compassion changes a legacy. And I didn't fully understand how powerful that sentence was, until the night everything came full circle. It was the 9th anniversary of the day. I walked out of that living room with my acceptance letter and a broken heart. To most people, it was just another Friday night. To me, it was the anniversary of a sentence that changed my destiny. I decided to do something no one expected. I invited my parents to the headquarters of the foundation. They had visited my office before. They had seen the awards, the glass walls, the conference rooms buzzing with young professionals. But they had never seen this part. The auditorium was already full when they arrived. Hundreds of scholarship recipients sat in neat rows, dressed in simple clothes but glowing with ambition. Behind them, a large screen displayed a single sentence: "No student left behind." My mother looked confused. My father stood quietly, absorbing everything. "What's this?" he asked softly. "It's the future," I replied. I guided them to the front row. As the lights dimmed, a short video began to play. Faces appeared one by one, students from different cities, different backgrounds. I almost dropped out. My parents couldn't afford the deposit. I thought my dream ended. Then someone said yes. Someone said yes. The words echoed in the hall. When the lights came back on, I walked onto the stage. The applause was overwhelming, but this time I wasn't chasing it. I raised my hand and the room fell silent. 9 years ago, I began, my voice steady but heavy with memory. I asked for help with tuition. You could hear a pin drop. I was told to be independent. I didn't say it with anger. I said it with truth. That moment hurt me. It forced me to grow up overnight. It forced me to struggle. It forced me to fight. I paused. But it also forced me to decide what kind of man I would become. I looked directly at my parents. And tonight, I want to thank the two people who unknowingly started this journey. A spotlight gently illuminated them. My mother covered her mouth. My father froze, eyes wide. Yes, I continued. When they told me to be independent, I thought they were closing a door. But what they really did was challenge me to build my own. The audience listened, breathless. "But here's what I've learned," I said, my voice rising with emotion. "Strength without compassion becomes cold. Independence without empathy becomes distance. And success without forgiveness becomes emptiness." I stepped forward. So I made a different choice. I chose to build doors that stay open. The screen behind me changed. A number appeared. 10,482 students funded. A collective gasp filled the auditorium. 10,482 students who didn't have to stand alone. 10,482 dreams that didn't collapse under financial pressure. I looked at my father again. For 9 years, I thought I was proving something. Tonight, I realized I was building something. I gestured to the students. "This is our legacy. Not mine. Ours." The crowd rose in a standing ovation. But the moment that broke me wasn't the applause. It was when my father stood up slowly and clapped with them. Tears streamed down my mother's face. My father's expression cracked. The same strong, composed man who once folded my acceptance letter, now wiping his eyes without shame. After the event, when the auditorium emptied and the lights dimmed, we stood together on the stage. "I didn't know," my father said quietly. "I know," I replied. He looked around the vast room, then back at me. "You turned our lesson into something bigger than we ever imagined." I smiled faintly. "I turned it into something kinder." For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then my father did something he had never done before. He hugged me first. Not as a teacher correcting a student. Not as a man defending a principle. But as a father proud beyond words. And in that embrace, the sentence that once felt like rejection finally transformed into something else. Release. 9 years ago, I walked away feeling alone. Tonight, I stood surrounded by thousands of lives changed because I refused to let pain define me. If you're watching this and you've ever been told to be independent, remember this. You can rise without becoming hard. You can succeed without becoming distant. You can be strong without standing alone. Independence built my success. Compassion built my legacy. And sometimes the greatest revenge isn't proving someone wrong. It's proving that love can grow even from a no.